But we go and meet everybody and say, hey, great show. And then still is.
Remember this?
Uh-huh. Amerie?
Yes.
Yeah. Sicko mode. I feel like this is Beyonce was in her nachos for that, for B-Day.
And so I still feel like I haven't reached my peak yet. Like I feel like it's just because it was like just starting and then kind of like, I don't want to say things went left.
A conversation that the music industry has been quietly avoiding for years is finally breaking through to the surface. And the reason it is happening now is simple. Amerie has reportedly reached a point where she has nothing left to lose. For a long time, speaking openly about what allegedly happened between her and Beyoncé carried serious professional consequences. People in the industry understood that challenging someone with that level of power, resources, and connections could end careers faster than any bad album or failed single ever could. So most people who knew what happened stayed quiet, kept their heads down, and moved on as best they could. Amerie is no longer in that position. According to reports spreading widely online, her situation has become so financially difficult that sources close to her are describing it as dire. The same woman who gave the world some of the most infectious R&B records of the early 2000s is reportedly facing circumstances that nobody who watched her rise ever imagined possible. Critics argue that drawing a direct line between her current financial struggles and any specific conflict with another artist is a massive simplification of how the music industry actually works. They point out that careers rise and fall for countless reasons, and that reducing Amerie's situation to one narrative ignores the full complexity of what happened over 2 decades. Supporters see things very differently. For them, the timeline speaks loudly enough on its own. One artist entered the same label, worked with the same producer, and walked away with a global empire. The other was left navigating a career that never recovered from a series of events that many people believe were not entirely accidental. That contrast is not something supporters are willing to dismiss as coincidence, and Amerie's willingness to finally speak more openly about her experience has only intensified the conversation. What makes this story particularly difficult to ignore is the combination of specific, documented details and a pattern that critics say is consistent enough to deserve serious scrutiny. This is not a vague story about one artist feeling overlooked by the industry. There are specific songs, specific producers, specific timelines, and specific financial outcomes attached to these allegations. Supporters argue that when you line all of those details up side by side, the picture that emerges is impossible to explain away with coincidence alone. Critics respond that the music industry has always involved artists drawing from each other, borrowing sounds, and working with shared collaborators, and that what looks like theft from one angle often looks like inspiration from another. The debate is intensifying because Amerie is no longer staying silent about what she experienced, and the internet is listening very closely to every word.
One thing came out in 2004 because I leaked it over Christmas because everyone will be on break, so they can't stop anything. Exactly. So I was like, I'm going to be out here. I'm going to drop a match. You know? For me, I was like, look, I think I might get dropped. So I just want people to hear the music. I don't really care about getting paid for it. I just want people to hear it because I believe in it. And they're on Christmas break, so we can just do it. And at the time, they were trying to give the record to somebody else. They were trying to do that, but they couldn't because I wrote on the record too. So you can't just take it. And that was frustrating for them, I guess.
But why?
To understand why this conversation is hitting so hard right now, it helps to look at the full pattern of allegations that have followed Beyoncé throughout her career. And there are more of them than most casual fans realize. Beyoncé's hit song, If I Were a Boy, was never written for her. The song was created by BC Jean together with producer Toby Gad, following a personal breakup, and Jean had been shopping it to labels as her debut single, the record she believed was finally going to give her the platform she had been working toward. Once Beyoncé's team became aware of it, her version was recorded quickly, and Jean was simply informed the song would be appearing on the album I Am Sasha Fierce. Jean tried to fight it, and ultimately had no choice but to accept a songwriting credit instead of the career-launching moment she had planned. That story alone would be significant, but it was far from the only one. Singer Jennifer Armour came forward with a very similar account involving the song Baby Boy. Back in 2003, Armour had presented her song Got a Little Bit of Love for You to Columbia Records, Beyoncé's label at the time. She heard nothing back until months later when the song appeared on the radio under Beyoncé's name. When Armour tried to seek compensation, she was reportedly shut down without meaningful recourse. Then there was producer Terrence T. Robinson, who brought a track to Matthew Knowles, hoping it would launch his career. Matthew disappeared with the material, and months later, Survivor was released without Terrence's name attached to it anywhere. Terrence filed a lawsuit, and the case is widely believed to have settled quietly, given the commercial success the song ultimately achieved. Beyoncé later told a concert audience that she wrote Irreplaceable for other women, a claim that Ne-Yo publicly disputed by confirming he wrote the song and gave it to her. And the dance routine copied from Italian pop star Lorella Cuccarini for the Billboard Music Awards performance of Run the World became one of the most documented examples of creative borrowing in her career, with Beyoncé eventually acknowledging she had seen and loved Lorella's original performance. But the situation with Amerie cuts deeper than any of these examples. When Amerie released her debut album, All I Have, in 2002, Columbia Records had limited expectations for it. What happened instead surprised everyone, particularly the lead single, Why Don't We Fall in Love, produced by Rich Harrison, which connected with audiences in a way the label had not anticipated. The visual video was intentionally stripped back, a white tank top, shorts, and red heels, Amerie walking through the streets, simple but magnetic. When Beyoncé released the Crazy in Love video shortly after, the visual similarities were immediate and impossible to miss. The same white tank top, the same shorts, the same red heels, the same focal point of a woman walking. Critics say visual overlap between artists in the same genre and label family is not automatically evidence of anything intentional. Supporters say the level of specific details shared between the two videos goes far beyond what coincidence can reasonably explain. And then Beyoncé began working with Rich Harrison, the same producer who Amerie herself described as her musical soulmate, the person who helped define her entire sound, from the ground up.
People would be like, wait, that's not your record? Why did he give that record to you? And I'm like, he never played that record for me. But after our first album, see the thing, what happened during that time?
Tell us.
Like after...
Tell us what happened. This is going to be all over the internet.
After the...
This is going to be a whole line, girl.
It's really simple. It's like we did the first album, right? And after the first album came out, it made a lot of noise and people really loved that album. And Jay loved the album too.
Amerie has been very clear on one specific point. She was never offered the song Crazy in Love and never turned it down. A lot of people assumed for years that Rich Harrison had brought the record to Amerie first and that she had passed on it for whatever reason. Amerie addressed that directly and said it simply never happened that way. Rich never played the song for her. According to her account, he may have originally written it with her in mind, but once a better deal presented itself, the song went to Beyoncé without Amerie ever hearing it. Critics say that a producer choosing to place a record with a more commercially established artist is a business decision that happens constantly in the music industry. They argue that Rich Harrison had no obligation to give Amerie any particular song, and that characterizing his choices as part of a broader pattern of harm directed at her career requires more evidence than currently exists in the public record. Supporters counter that the issue is not any single decision in isolation. It is the cumulative effect of multiple decisions that all moved in the same direction at the same time. The situation became even more pointed when Beyoncé's song Greenlight attracted significant attention for how closely it resembled Amerie's One Thing. Both songs were up-tempo R&B tracks driven by fast, syncopated drum patterns and punchy horn samples. Both shared the same BPM of 132. Both featured similar vocal delivery styles and energy. What made the comparison more complicated was that Greenlight was produced by the Neptunes, a completely separate production team with no direct connection to Rich Harrison or to Amerie's work. Critics point to that fact as evidence that the similarity was coincidental rather than calculated. Supporters argue that by the time Greenlight was created, Beyoncé had spent enough time studying and absorbing Amerie's sound across 2 albums, long enough to internalize the sonic signature that Amerie and Rich Harrison had built together, and carry elements of it into new work with different collaborators. Supporters say that description points to deliberate creative appropriation. Critics say it describes how musical influence works across the entire history of popular music. What is not in dispute is what happened to both careers afterward. Beyoncé went on to become one of the most commercially successful entertainers in recorded history. Amerie parted ways with Columbia Records after the label mishandled the rollout of her album, spent a decade so disillusioned with the music industry that she could not bring herself to listen to anyone's music, not even her own, and is now dealing with financial circumstances that court documents have placed in stark public view.
That was kind of like a defense mechanism, actually. So I went through like 10 years where I didn't listen to anything.
Why?
But generally, see, I thought that it was because now I'm writing. My novel's coming out June 10th, by the way. I thought it was because, you're in writing mode and you're not in that right now. But then I realized later, I was like, you weren't listening to music because you were trying to avoid it. You felt like it was going to make you angsty because it's going to make you want to make music, which is going to make you kind of like, oh, but this is the time. And how last time this, and maybe that won't work, and how do I do this, and how do I do that? So all you're going to do is be frustrated. And so that just made me be like, I'm not listening to any music.
The financial detail that has stopped people cold is this. Recent court documents revealed that Amerie's reported monthly income was just $5,735. For context, that is less than $69,000 a year. For the woman who created Why Don't We Fall in Love and One Thing, 2 records that defined an era of R&B and influenced countless artists who came after her, that number is genuinely shocking to a lot of people who grew up with her music. Critics are careful to point out that court document income figures often represent a snapshot of a specific financial moment rather than a complete picture of someone's overall situation. They argue that drawing sweeping conclusions about Amerie's entire financial reality from a single filing is not entirely fair, and that public figures often have assets, investments, and income streams that do not appear in standard court documentation. Supporters respond that even accounting for those limitations, the contrast between where Beyoncé's career took her and where Amerie's career ended up is impossible to look at without asking serious questions about how the industry treated both women differently during a period when they were competing for the same resources at the same label with many of the same collaborators. The label dynamic at Columbia Records during that era is something multiple industry insiders have pointed to as a critical factor in how things played out. Both artists were signed to the urban division simultaneously, which meant they were directly competing for budget, marketing support, radio promotion, and executive attention. When those resources are finite, the artist with more established industry relationships and a bigger existing platform almost always wins that competition. Amerie never had a realistic chance of matching the infrastructure that was already in place behind Beyoncé, and according to people who watched it happen from the inside, Beyoncé's team understood that advantage and used it deliberately.
For 10 years, Amerie stopped listening to music entirely. Not just Beyoncé's music, not just R&B, all of it. Every genre, every artist, every sound. She has spoken about this publicly and been remarkably honest about what drove that decade of silence. On the surface, she told herself it was because she had shifted into writing mode and was focused on her novels. But looking back, she recognized it for what it actually was, a defense mechanism against the pain of an industry that had taken something she loved and turned it into a source of frustration and loss. Critics say that kind of emotional withdrawal from creative work is something many artists experience, regardless of industry politics, and that attributing Amerie's decade of silence specifically to what happened with Beyoncé and Columbia Records projects a narrative onto a personal experience that may have had many contributing factors. That is a reasonable point that deserves acknowledgement. Supporters argue that Amerie herself has connected those dots publicly, and that dismissing her own account of her own experience
opinions in favor of a more comfortable interpretation is exactly the kind of thing that allowed the original situation to go unaddressed for so long. What people online keep returning to is a single question that nobody has been able to answer satisfactorily. What would Amerie's career have looked like if the resources, the producer relationships, and the label support had been distributed differently during those critical years in the early 2000s? The sound she and Rich Harrison created together was genuinely innovative. It was infectious, it was distinctive, and it connected with audiences immediately. The evidence that it influenced what came after is not subtle. It is documented in production credits, BPM numbers, sonic comparisons, and the public statements of people who were in the room when it happened. Supporters believe that with the same backing Beyoncé received, Amerie's trajectory could have looked dramatically different. Critics respond that the music industry has never been fair, that countless talented artists have been overlooked or outmaneuvered by more powerful forces throughout its entire history, and that singling out Beyoncé as uniquely responsible for Amerie's situation ignores the systemic nature of how the industry has always operated. Both of those things can be true simultaneously, and the tension between them is exactly what makes this conversation so difficult to resolve. What is clear is that Amerie is still here, still creating and still speaking her truth about what she experienced, and that the internet is paying closer attention to her story now than it has in years. Do you think Beyoncé deliberately targeted Amerie's career, or is this simply how the music industry has always worked for artists without the right connections? Sound off in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe.